The metallic tang of spilled blood clung to the air, a phantom taste mirroring the coppery stain that bloomed across the pristine white tablecloth. Sunlight sliced through the opulent restaurant window, illuminating the shattered remains of a wine glass. The scent was a cruel echo of the laughter, the clinking of crystal, the promises whispered just hours before. Keanu, still disguised as a homeless man, now slumped against the cold, unyielding marble of the booth. His hand, trembling despite his practiced control, brushed against the smooth, empty space where his wedding ring had been. He replayed the scene in his mind, the sudden, furious accusations, the venomous words that sliced deeper than any blade. The final, devastating ultimatum. The hollow echo of his own denial, the desperate plea that was met with a stony, unforgiving silence. His wife had left, vanishing into the bustling city, erasing years of shared history with a stroke of a pen. The betrayal, as sharp and sudden as a gunshot, left a wound that throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The unresolved question consumed him: had he, in chasing the fleeting allure of fame, truly known her? Or was he simply a ghost, a performer trapped inside a gilded cage of his own making, a hollow echo of the man she thought she loved? Was he now paying the ultimate price for his ambition, left to wander in the wasteland of his own creation? He closed his eyes, seeking a moment of solace in the dark. Was his transformation, his undercover work, all in vain? The answer, he knew, would change everything. The air hung thick, heavy with the cloying sweetness of spilled soda clinging to the vinyl booths. A single, flickering fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. This McDonald's wasn't a place of bright, inviting smiles. It was a mausoleum of cheap plastic and forgotten dreams, the decaying beauty of a place where the veneer of fast food couldn't mask the desperation underneath. The smell of stale fries mixed with the acrid odor of cleaning solution. Across the aisle sat Marco, a man whose face was as weathered and worn as the restaurant itself. He clutched a half-eaten burger, his eyes darting nervously around the near-empty space, a stark contrast to Keanu's relative stillness. Marco, a former actor who squandered opportunities, now haunted the edges of the industry, a bitter reminder of Keanu's own potential pitfalls. Their relationship was built on a shared past. Keanu, recognizing a flicker of recognition, approached Marco's booth. "Heard you were at the audition for the director's cut," Marco said, his voice raspy, a cynical twist to his lips. "Good for you. Bet you charmed them with that charity act." Keanu's flaw was his detachment, an inability to connect with genuine emotion. Marco, with a subtle wave of his greasy hand, indicated the tattered clothes. "Still at it, I see. Pretending to be broken helps keep the real monsters away, eh?" Keanu's redeeming quality was his genuine curiosity, his unwavering desire to understand the human condition. "The role demands it," Keanu replied calmly, his voice steady despite Marco's barbed words. "And maybe, it's not just a role." Marco sneered, but Keanu did not flinch. Marco then took a large bite from his burger. The tension hung between them, heavy and unspoken, a history of missed chances and bruised egos. Keanu, ever the observer, saw the truth in Marco's bitter words, his gaze fixed on the flickering light. The weight of his lies, the cost of his pretense, suddenly became very, very real. "You're playing a dangerous game, Keanu," Marco rasped, his eyes narrow, the burger forgotten. "Helping them will expose you, everyone." "What then?" Keanu met his gaze, his face betraying no emotion. "It's already exposed. Your actions are a disease." Marco slammed his fist on the table, sending a ripple through the greasy surface. "I thought you were different, that you understood. You don't belong with these people." The cashier, overhearing, turned away from the register, locking eyes with Marco. He quietly approached the booth. Marco nodded at him. The cashier then grabbed Keanu's coat and threw it outside. Marco stared at him. Keanu was alone. Keanu, divested of his disguise and exposed in the unforgiving light of the Mcdonalds, made his choice. He would shatter the illusion, leverage his fame to ignite genuine change. This decision stemmed from the confluence of his detachment, the very flaw that had isolated him from true intimacy, and his persistent query. The potential fallout surged through him, his livelihood, his anonymity, the carefully crafted image he'd cultivated. As he steeled himself to speak, the steady thrum of the soda dispensers morphed, escalating into a frenetic pulse, a nervous staccato mirroring the turmoil within. He drew a steadying breath, the phantom taste of his wife's blood still vivid on his palate. "I am Keanu Reeves," he declared, his voice cutting through the sudden hush. The immediate impact was pandemonium. Phones erupted, social media exploded with the news, a digital wildfire. A throng of onlookers coalesced, barricading the exits. He caught sight of Marco receding, swallowed by the burgeoning crowd. The external doors slammed shut, sealing off any hope of escape. The cashier, a mix of fear and exhilaration contorting his features, raced to the service window, his words a frantic, unintelligible stream as the wail of police sirens grew louder. Keanu was now a captive in that fluorescent-lit purgatory. The oily smell of fries intensified, a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. He walked back to his booth, the only place left. He picked his phone up, a single move which conveyed everything. The hum of the soda machines abruptly ceased, plunging the Mcdonald's into a near silence, broken only by the ragged breaths of those present. The power outage, foreshadowed by the erratic fluctuations, was the catastrophic event. The lights died. Keanu, caught in the sudden dark, heard a panicked cry from Sarah. He was blinded. His flaw, detachment, was useless now. Marco, in that moment of panic, saw an opportunity. His selfishness, his primary trait, had him running out the door. Sarah, her face illuminated by the emergency lights, was now more vulnerable than ever. "Sarah!" Keanu called out, his voice a frantic whisper. "Stay there!" He started looking for her blindly, and trying to take care of the situation to save her. Sarah, her composure momentarily shattered, yelled back, but her voice got more distant. The cashier, seizing the moment, chose loyalty. The cashier, a teenager who'd grown up idolizing Keanu, recognized an opportunity to redeem his own life. "Help Sarah!" Keanu yelled. Marco, choosing survival over any loyalty, had disappeared, leaving the situation completely in Keanu's hands. The cashier, in the split second, unlocked the service exit and called for help, deciding that loyalty to the celebrity mattered more than anything else. That decision, made in the dark, would forever change the dynamics of the situation. The immediate consequence was chaos. The service exit slammed shut behind Sarah, leaving Keanu alone, surrounded by a growing, frightened crowd. His detachment, his carefully constructed facade, crumbled. He had a responsibility now. The shouts of the patrons mixed with the growing wail of emergency services. A new figure emerged from the crowd, Detective Miller, a man who, years prior, had investigated a matter involving Keanu. He was one of the few people who knew about Keanu's undercover work. Miller, ever the pragmatist, his gaze cold, gestured towards the service exit. "Reeves," he said, his voice sharp, "we can secure this place, manage the crowd. But that exit stays locked until we have order. You're a liability right now." The new character was the detective. Miller presented him with a choice: protect Sarah, or protect his image. "We can find her later. Right now, the focus has to be control." The choice was a reflection of his unresolved question. Keanu thought, find her later? But what if, his flaw, his detachment, had always made him prioritize his professional life over his personal one? He could hear Sarah's scared cries. Then, he thought, do I save myself, or do I save her? A choice had to be made. The detective wasn't giving him time to contemplate. Keanu's gaze flickered. He had to go. He thought, then, I am an actor, and this is my role. It wasn't the choice he wanted. Keanu, having chosen his image over Sarah, was immediately confronted with the consequences of his actions. Detective Miller, his face grim in the flashing lights, barked orders. "We need to secure this place, Mr. Reeves. You need to come with us." The patrons surged forward, phones raised, a sea of flashing screens and shouted questions. The air crackled with the energy of a collapsing dam. He felt, for the first time, the full weight of his celebrity, not as a tool, but as a cage. The trip to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and the harsh glare of the interrogation room. The interrogation was a blur of accusations and forced civility. Miller, with the calculated cruelty of a seasoned investigator, pressed him about his method acting and his involvement in a recent legal case. It was designed to break him. He felt a pang of remorse for Sarah, abandoned. The cashier's betrayal, his choice to let her go with Marco, left a bitter taste. He was now completely alone. Then, Miller brought a photo. It was Sarah, with cuts. He heard Miller's words, as his voice had become a distant buzz. Miller's words, as if he was looking through the keyhole. The choice had put Sarah in danger. He suddenly said, "I have to help her." And that was the beginning of the Keanu we never see. Detective Miller revealed the truth, a moment that would irrevocably alter Keanu's perception. Marco had been feeding the tabloid press information about Keanu's undercover work, jeopardizing the operation, and, by extension, Sarah. He'd betrayed the trust of everyone there. Keanu felt as if he had been punched in the gut. The betrayal, a familiar sting, this time felt different, pure, ice-cold, impersonal. His detachment, his carefully constructed emotional barrier, shattered. It was his fault. He saw Miller's face, the cold calculation, and realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Keanu's jaw clenched, the blood drained from his face. He was a fool for trusting Marco. But, what was done was done. He had no more choices. He had to find Sarah. He turned to Miller, his voice a low growl. "I know how to get her back." The new Keanu was born. He would use his celebrity and the press to find her and expose Marco. He walked out of the station, the biting night air a shock after the stale interrogation room. The decision, to use his fame, weighed heavily on his shoulders. He needed to find Sarah. Back at the Mcdonald's, now a crime scene, the air still reeked of grease and desperation. The cashier, eyes red, stared at him from behind the police tape. His resolve wavered for a moment. The cashier handed him a note and said with a low voice, "I am sorry." He got inside of the car and started reading it, as the rain was falling. The note's simplicity was its power, but for what was in it he had to make one more decision. He had to go alone, but the stakes were too high, and the betrayal was too deep. He called his agent, the only person he could trust. "I need you, Star." He had decided that with the media would come the truth. He drove to the nearest TV station. It was a risk, but it was the only play. He prepared to tell the world. His hand, on the wheel, tightened. He would play this role till the end. Before the cameras, before the chaos, before everything, Keanu stood alone. The boy, the cashier, approached him, his face pale, and handed him a note. His voice was low, barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. It was a moment that would be forever remembered. He opened the note and read it. Asterisk, I saw what you did. You're not like the others. Asterisk. Keanu looked at the boy's eyes. They were filled with fear. You saved her, Keanu said. The boy nodded, and he looked at the floor. I just wanted to do the right thing. Keanu's gaze dropped. The boy's words felt like a reflection of what he'd lost. He looked again at the boy. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity, a fleeting connection in a world of shadows. It was a simple gesture, a brief moment of shared understanding. He stood there for a moment, and then the detective called his name. The moment ended. The TV station was abuzz. Keanu, poised to tell the world, felt a flicker of doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Then, a new twist. Detective Miller stormed in, his face grim. We found Sarah. Keanu's heart leaped. Where is she? At the airport, Miller said, his voice flat. Marco arranged a flight. Keanu, a man defined by his ability to detach, felt a cold knot of rage. I'm going. You can't, Miller said. It's a trap. Marco knows you're coming. Miller took a step back and grabbed a phone. Keanu, however, pushed past him, a new resolve hardening his features. He ran for the exit. He had to choose. He had to find her, even if it was the biggest mistake of his life. He ran. He could hear Miller's words as he ran. Then, a shout. From the doorway. It was Sarah. Sarah was fine, and the whole thing had been planned. Marco was not evil, but he wanted to work with Keanu. Keanu, shocked. His choice, his action, meant nothing. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. The interrogation went for hours, fueled by Miller's relentless pursuit. The media frenzy that Keanu had started had backfired. The public, incensed by the deception, turned on him, a mob of online hate. His career was over. Later, Sarah approached him, her face etched with a mixture of anger and pity. Why, Keanu? Why did you do this? He looked at her, his heart aching. The damage was done. He had lost her trust and everything he'd strived to protect, and, as he'd begun to realize, his life was just a game that he'd always taken as a role. He left the station, stepping into the harsh glare of the morning. The world felt muted, the city a cold, indifferent machine. He knew then that he couldn't go back to his old life. He could no longer escape. Years later, far from the limelight, he found himself working in a homeless shelter, helping others. He saw Sarah again, one day, and from a distance he could feel the pain he caused. The past would never truly leave him, but in the quiet acts of service, In the small gestures of human kindness, he found a fragile peace. He had learned the cost of detachment. He looked at the people in front of him, and he knew he wouldn't let this happen again. He had to change. He was free.